How's it going, everyone? The new chapter coming to DBD for the 8-year anniversary is set to be announced officially very soon, but the leaks for the chapter, if you trust them, say it's going to be Vecna. No, not this Vecna from Stranger Things, and no, not Skirms' pet chihuahua, Mr. Vecna, but this Chad right here. This is Vecna from Dungeons & Dragons specifically. If these leaks turn out to be true, it also means that the next chapter after this one, spoiler alert, is going to be Dracula from Castlevania, which would be sick as hell. Hey there, real quick interruption, Choi from the future here. Behavior once again trolled me and unceremoniously confirmed that at least the Dungeons & Dragons aspect of the leak is true, right as I was about to upload this, so I just wanted to drop in and mention that. Alright. Back to the original video. But for this video, if you haven't seen this series before, we're going to be looking at 4 community killer concepts for Vecna and reviewing them to see which one would be the best for Dead by Daylight. Now, although the chapter is supposed to be Vecna from Dungeons & Dragons and not Stranger Things, there's not many D&D killer concepts for the D&D version of Vecna. In fact, there's only one. That said, Vecna from Stranger Things is basically supposed to be the same character, right? So let's review these 4 community concepts. Alright, we're starting with the Lich, and this concept actually comes from Wheat Draws. If you're unfamiliar with Wheat Draws, he's a pretty awesome guy. He makes a lot of what you see in the incredible community created concept videos that I'm sure you've seen. He also does commissions, so I'll put a link to his page down in the description if you're interested, because he makes some really amazing art for DBD. Alright, the Lich. An exploitative killer using his power Vile Darkness to single out and use them to his advantage, creating gates to establish his presence using unwilling pawns in his master plan. His personal perks, Domain of Dread, Initiative Order, and Afterthought gives access to methods of isolating victims, preying on insecurity, and hindering them through it. Alright, so let's start with the power Vile Darkness. Special ability Dread Chime. Tap the active ability button to begin the Dread Chime to prepare selecting a survivor that isn't in the dying state or on a sacrificial hook. Holding the active ability button down for 2 seconds will end the Dread Chime without making a selection. Tap the active ability button again while Dread Chime is still ongoing to cycle to the next available survivor and confirm the selection by pressing the power button. That survivor then becomes haunted, afflicted with the Oblivious status effect for 20 seconds, and then a global audio cue can be heard ringing from throughout the trial when Dread Chime has begun. Only the survivor affected by Dread Chime is aware they are haunted. The Dread Chime then ends. Only one survivor may be haunted at a time. Okay, let's see how this continues. Special ability Vecna's Curse. Hold the power button for 5 seconds to possess the haunted survivor. That survivor stops in place and begins floating in the air for up to 8 seconds, where you can look around freely and observe from their perspective as a gate is formed beneath them. Your terror radius emits from the possessed survivor, and all other survivors within it are highlighted with Killer Instinct for as long as you are possessing the survivor. Pressing the power button again will end the possession early. Possessed survivors are no longer haunted, and you both regain control after the possession ends. Vecna's Curse has a 35-second cooldown. Gates. Holding the power button for 1.5 seconds while Dread Chime is ongoing, and you are facing a gate will teleport you to the gate after 30 seconds. Using a gate will cause it to be destroyed. Survivors cannot tamper with them, but they can see them on the ground once they've formed. So if I'm understanding this power correctly, it's basically a information power with a little bit of a Symmetro style teleport going on, where you put down gates that you can walk through, like a portal gun, maybe? That could actually be pretty interesting, having like a portal style killer that just creates portals and walks through them, like if it's done right. I have a feeling that this concept is going in an entirely different direction than all the other concepts, which is pretty cool. The only thing that's concerning is that these gates would have to be effective in a chase, right? If these gates weren't effective inside of a chase, then this power would not be very good. But if the gates worked like really effectively, then it could be pretty sick. Like, I think you could pull off some pretty cool plays. It would kind of be like a more reasonably balanced version of Nurse in a way. If there's more to the power, I'll be honest, I think I missed it, but that's kind of what I gathered from it. All right, now let's take a look at the perks. Domain of Dread. They will walk into their own suffering shamefully, or you will drag them into it kicking and screaming in their last attempt at denial. Survivors within your terror radius that are hiding in lockers or crouching suffer from the deafened and blindness status effects. This effect persists for an additional 6 seconds after exiting a locker or standing up. I'm not really sure how much value you could get out of this perk. The first thing that comes to my mind is you could potentially use it on like Nemesis, because Nemesis gets crouched a lot while he's using his power, and then that would take out windows of opportunity with the blindness effect for a few seconds. But yeah, other than that, I think this is probably not a very valuable perk. I mean, survivors are already blind when they're in a locker, so yeah, it's just a bit odd. Yeah, I definitely don't see too much value in this one. Initiative Order. Your presence intimidates your opposition, allowing you to make the first and most important move. At the start of the trial, and whenever you kill or sacrifice a survivor, you gain a 5% haste status effect for 4 seconds. This duration is increased by 3 seconds for each survivor still alive in the trial. Well, the 5% haste at the beginning of the game for what is it? I think it would be like 13 seconds since all the survivors are alive. I don't think that's too valuable for like an entire perk. It's kind of an unhealthy perk because not only does it encourage tunneling, but it's not very good at the same time, which is a bit odd. So I would probably say not the biggest fan of this perk either. All right, and for the last perk, we have Afterthought. Letting people into their walls will be their downfall. Whenever a survivor attempts to heal the obsession, they scream, revealing their location, and suffer from the incapacitated status effect for 14 seconds. That survivor then becomes the obsession. Now, like, inherently right off the bat, I know that by using this perk with certain other perks and certain killer powers, you're going to be able to pull off some of those like more interesting, funny builds that people don't initially think about when they first see the perk. It's definitely niche. It's not like a meta perk. It's just one of those perks that I know players are going to find a way to take advantage of and have a little bit of fun with. So I'm always for like perks like that. The other two, I'm not a huge fan of, but the art of these is really cool. Again, Wheat Jaws definitely make some cool art. All right, next up we have Vecna, the Arc Lich. And this is from Jamba, and he's the only person who actually made the Dungeons and Dragons version of this killer. And this is pretty old. This was not made recently, so keep that in mind. The Arc Lich transcends time to recover what was lost. Once done, the Arc Lich manifests his foul thoughts and dreams in a frightening display. Special ability Severed Artifacts. Vecna starts the trial with his hand and eye severed and scattered across the map. I'm assuming that has to do with D&D lore. He must recover either one to be able to use his power, and he must recover both to unleash his power's full potential. At the start of the trial, Vecna can see the aura of his eye, but not his hand. Once his eye is collected, Vecna can see the aura of his hand. If a survivor finds either artifact first, they may collect it to use them as an item. Once held by a survivor, Vecna cannot collect the artifact until that survivor is put into the dying state. Using either artifact as an item temporarily tempts the survivor with evil, turning them into an AI-controlled enemy that hunts for and attacks other survivors for 15 seconds. All right, that's pretty sweet. Once all charges of the artifact are depleted, the artifact is removed from the survivor's inventory and placed randomly somewhere on the map. As an item, the hand allows survivors to fire a Finger of Death projectile that, if it hits him, stuns Vecna in a similar manner to a pallet, but for twice as long. As an item, the eye allows survivors to cast a Dominant Monster projectile that, if it hits him, covers Vecna's screen with a swarm of angry crows for 10 seconds. And I can tell that these spells are definitely from Dungeons and Dragons. This is definitely very unique so far. Special ability Flight of the Damned. With one artifact collected, Vecna can cast Flight of the Damned, a spell that launches a quick burst of ghosts 30 meters forward, passing through walls. Survivors hit by these ghosts become frightened, a new status effect that makes them reveal their auras by constantly screaming. Frightened survivors also face a 5% movement speed increase when moving themselves away from Vecna, but a 5% movement decrease when moving themselves toward Vecna. With both artifacts collected, Flight of the Damned becomes a 120 meter stream that Vecna can freely hold down with the same effects as with one artifact. His power is sounding somewhat similar to the artist. Not so sure about the movement speed changes. I'm not a huge fan of movement speed based powers. I think they're kind of boring. I really get annoyed primarily by Skull Merchant just because of that. Like, if Skull Merchant didn't have the movement speed aspects to her power, I honestly don't even think I would be that annoyed playing against her anymore. This looks like it's building to make a very frustrating killer to play as, because not only can the survivors stun you with your own power for twice as long as a palace stun, which sounds bad, but it's also really encouraging shift W gameplay because survivors get a 5% movement speed increase when moving away from you. And if the killer can kind of manipulate you at loops, the thing that you're going to be doing is you're just going to be shift Wing, and you're going to be doing it with a 5% movement speed increase, which is just kind of odd. Again, it's like this killer feels like they're punishing themselves, and I'm not a big fan of that. The thing that I really like is the AI controlled survivors where they try to kill their teammates. It's only for 15 seconds though, and if Knight has taught us anything, it's that AI in this game isn't that top notch, so that would probably be very unreliable. So overall, I think that if survivors got used to playing against this killer, they would make it pretty unbearable to play as, to be honest. And his power, like his actual power that he gets from actually collecting the artifacts, is kind of not that interesting. So if the artifacts themselves came with a more interesting power, I think that this would actually be a pretty interesting, solid idea for a killer, and I'm all for seeing something like this in the future. All right, now let's move on to the perks. Undying King. Only one sword has ever broken your flesh. Each time you attack a healthy survivor, you have a 10% chance to instantly put them in the dying state if you have been stunned by a pallet within the last minute. Now, this perk, unfortunately, it's kind of like a different version of Hubris, but it's really not good. You have only a 10% chance to instantly put them in the dying state after they've stunned you with a pallet within the last 60 seconds. So it's just really not a good perk. I don't think you'd literally ever get value out of this. I definitely would never use it. Whispered One. Your name evokes terror and cruelty. You recover from basic attacks twice as fast when attacking a survivor who has not been within your terror radius for 1 minute. I actually like this perk. I think if you're like a stealth killer or something, this is actually really interesting. It's like another take on Save the Best for Last, but maybe in a more healthy way than Save the Best for Last. Yeah, no, I definitely like this. I think it would be good for stealth killers for sure, or stealth builds. Rotted Tower Lord. You are a conqueror of realms beyond life and death. When standing still for 5 seconds, you see the auras of all survivors who are lower than you on the map for 1 minute. I'm not sure if this is supposed to have a cooldown or not. I don't know if it needs one, but it's an interesting idea for a perk, to be honest. But it does need some adjustments. You can't just have aura reading for free for 1 minute just because you stood on a staircase, right? Obviously, you know, oh, Nurse breaks the perk. Like, what doesn't Nurse break about this game? But she's not the only one that is too strong with this perk. Like, if you get on a map like Midwich, you're basically going to have permanent aura reading on every survivor who isn't on the second floor, right? This is just way too strong for mobility killers. I think the more healthy version of this perk would be you go to high ground, and then any survivors that are below you, you see their aura for 5 seconds, right? You see their aura for 5 seconds, so you know where everyone's at. You could kind of go up and scope the map, and I think that's kind of a cool idea. But you don't get to keep the permanent aura reading. That's just too much and kind of silly. So that's definitely the way that this perk could actually be really cool. Overall, an interesting concept for sure. I'm not super familiar with Dungeons and Dragons lore, but I could definitely see some lore in a lot of this, so that's cool. For those of you who are into D&D lore, does this make sense? Do you think this would be a good idea for the killer that we're supposedly going to be getting? Let me know, because this is the only D&D concept that I have. All right, for our third concept, we have the Curse, made by Harley Zed Mona, and the art here was done by Geta Greta 1231, so give them the credit. And it's cool art again too, I can see that already. All right, let's look at the power. At the beginning of the trial, a random survivor will be selected as the Curse's victim. After 60 seconds, the survivor will passively enter the mindscape and immediately become healthy. In the mindscape, they will suffer from the incapacitated status effect and be able to see or interact with other survivors. The curse will follow the survivor into the mindscape, where he can kill them by his hand, like straight up mori them as soon as they're down, it looks like. Other survivors will see the cursed survivor frozen in place and be able to help them by retrieving a mixtape. 4 mixtapes will spawn at the start of the trial, and their auras will be revealed whenever a survivor enters the mindscape. A non-cursed survivor holding a mixtape can use the play music action on a survivor being pursued inside the mindscape to spawn a portal within the mindscape directly at the cursed survivor's frozen body. A portal will also spawn after 60 seconds have elapsed in the mindscape. A cursed survivor can use this portal to return to their bodies and escape the mindscape. After the survivor either escapes or is killed, Vecna's curse will activate on another random survivor. Jesus Christ. If I'm understanding this right, this means that like you could basically kill a survivor within the first 2 minutes of the game, right? Because they get spawned into the mindscape, which I'm assuming is basically the same exact map that you're playing on, but just in kind of like a 1v1 version of it where there's no other survivors going around, because it says that the portal spawns at the survivor's body, which makes me assume that it's the same map that you're playing on. But yeah, Vecna can basically kill you within 2 minutes of the match starting by downing you and then mooring you inside the mindscape. That's definitely intense. Like, if you can't chase well against a killer, you're going to just die in the first 2 minutes, essentially, right? I don't know. That sounds like a very risky killer concept. It sounds interesting, but also very, very scary. Obviously, your teammates can rescue you from the mindscape, but I'm not sure how many times these mixtapes can be used. Can they be used infinitely, or can they only be used once? There's definitely some interesting things behind this. I'm not so sure I'm all for it. I think it's a little too much. I think that the better idea would probably be that when you put a victim into the mindscape, they don't heal automatically. And instead, when you down them in the mindscape in sort of your 1v1 chase where other survivors can't body block and stuff like that, then they kind of go on a hook, right? And then maybe that's how it works. And then when they're on death hook, then you can kill them. Like they're sort of like a pyramid head type thing where, or Sadako, where he has a built-in Mori when they're on death hook. I don't think he should be able to kill people, you know, just because that's how his power works. That just seems like it's going to result in cringe gameplay. Good idea there to work with. I think it's really cool, and kind of seems like it's based a little bit off of the last Halloween event. But yeah, no insta Moris in the first 2 minutes. I just don't think that's going to end well. But let's continue with the special ability. Necrotic Vines. Press and hold the power button to charge a vine, increasing its range with the length of the charge. Upon release, the vine will slowly crawl on the ground towards its destination, ignoring vault locations. If it collides with a survivor, it will bind them in place. Bound survivors will be unable to move, but can use the break free action to break themselves free. Okay, so this is a little bit of like a pinhead type power. It kind of seems like a little bit like the chain, but it moves slowly. So this would have to be worth its salt, right? Like if you want a power like this to work, but the vines move slowly, it says the vines move slowly, then it needs to grab the survivors enough to where you're pretty much guaranteed a hit if they get hit by this vine. If the vine moves a little bit faster, then you can work with the timings on that, but it needs to be worth its salt, like I said. You can't have it to where the vines move slow and then the survivor can instantly break out of it like Pinhead's chains. That would just be really lame. But yeah, I like the necrotic vines idea. I think it's pretty decent. Overall, I think that like this concept here is very like workable. Like it's a good base concept to brainstorm off of and create a cool killer power overall. But let's move on to the perks. Again, the art here is really good. Good job by Get Greta here. So the first perk, Widow's Web. There is joy to be found in making a trophy of your victims. The first time survivors engage in a cooperative action with one another, they will scream, revealing their location and linking them with Widow's Web. When you kill a survivor by any means, any other survivor that have engaged in cooperative actions with them will suffer from the incapacitated and exhausted status effect for 20 seconds. So I'm just going to come right out and say it. This is a terrible perk. It incentivizes, again, tunneling, and then the reward for doing so is again very small, which is just strange. Like, just run Discordance if you want to have a perk like this. I do like the idea of tying two survivors together, though. I will say that I think there's a cool concept in that. So I would definitely like that idea to be fleshed out in maybe another perk. But this like whole idea of you just kill a survivor and then it punishes another survivor, like again, encouraging tunneling, and also like this perk and the power itself makes me think that this was like created for another game that's not Dead by Daylight. Like when a survivor dies, it's not like a small deal. Like when a survivor is dead in Dead by Daylight and the game becomes a 3v1, the game is pretty much almost always over. So this like idea that, oh, we'll just kill a survivor off like it's nothing, which is kind of like what this killer concept leans into. It's just not how DBD works. You don't kill a survivor super quickly, so it just kind of feels like it's being made for another game and not so much DBD. All right, perk number 2, victimize. You're selective with your targets, knowing exactly who to strike and when they least expect it. After gaining Bloodlust Tier 1, any other survivor within your terror radius not currently in chase suffer from the exposed status effect. The effect lingers for 12 seconds after you lose Bloodlust. I'm not totally against this perk, to be honest. I know like people already hate Bloodlust, and the whole idea of you get rewarded for Bloodlust might be like really annoying, but it's also a very niche perk. Like you can't make this perk work for you. You know what I mean? Like it's very situational and you have no control over that. So you're taking that as sort of a risk, but it could be a perk that works well on a killer that isn't very good, right? And I kind of like perks like that because like, you know, like Nurse or something is never ever going to get value out of this, or basically any killer that uses their power to try to get downs is not going to get any value out of this. The only killers that are even going to have a chance of getting value out of this are weaker M1 killers, but I'm definitely okay with it. And for the last perk, we have Hex Misanthropy. If I'm saying that wrong, well, you're wrong. Get over it. You find purpose in your hatred for humanity. When a survivor heals another survivor for 1 health state, gain a token and the ability to see the auras of all survivors within 8 meters. Each additional token increases the aura reading range by 8 meters. Misanthropy does not activate until the first token is gained, after which it takes the place of a dull totem if there is one remaining on the map. To be honest, I think this is a pretty good hex perk. Like, you know, it knows that it's strong enough that it can't just be a normal perk, but it also doesn't activate until you actually start getting value out of it, which is really nice. I think that's something they could maybe look into with a perk like Devour Hope, where it doesn't actually activate until you get your first token, so that it doesn't just get like insta destroyed. I think that's pretty lame. I'm more into this style where it doesn't actually activate until it activates. Makes it a little bit more interesting to run perks like that. And it's like it's strong, but it's not overly strong to the point where there's no chance that you'll be able to win if it's activated, right? I do think that hex perks should be scary and that you should have a reason to want to get rid of them as fast as possible and not push gens, right? And when you run a hex perk like this, you're sacrificing gen defense, so it's got to be strong enough. Overall, I like Harley's idea for a killer. I think that like if you took this concept of these perks, if you took the concept of this power and you sat down in a room with a few other people and you brainstormed off of this concept, you could really clean it up and create something really cool for the game. And for our last concept, we have the curse made by several spray. Starting with the power Cursed Boulder. Hold the ability button to summon a throwable boulder. Release when fully charged to throw the boulder forward. The boulder travels at 2 times the speed of a running survivor. If the boulder hits a survivor, they lose a health state. Additionally, if it hits a survivor, inflict them with 20% cursed. If the boulder collides with a pallet or breakable wall, it will break it. Cannot go over pallets, but can go through windows. Cooldown of 10 seconds after being thrown. I never really pictured Vecna as a boulder thrower. I do know he has telekinesis, and there's that scene where he's throwing things from the sky. But in all honesty, it kind of sounds like it would work pretty well as a power. People really like ranged killers, and I think the boulder has a cool way that it operates and how you can break pallets with it and break breakable walls with it and hit survivors with it. Like, that would definitely feel really good to both hit and dodge with. So I do like the boulder power. The only thing is that you could maybe say it's a little bit lackluster because it's like Vecna and he's just throwing boulders at you like Donkey Kong or something. Like, I don't know, maybe that part of it doesn't seem cool, but since it's like telekinesis, I think they could make it look cool. All right, let's move on. Curse of Henry Creel. Survivors have a circle around their icon showing what percent cursed they are. When a survivor is fully cursed, they are transported to the upside down. If another survivor has a Walkman, they can use it on them to save them from the upside down. Survivors in the upside down will appear floating in the air in the real world. Survivors in the upside down have 35 seconds before they die by being lifted into the air and having their bones broken. Survivors gain 1% cursed every 5 seconds. Survivors also gain cursed points in the following ways: being hit by a cursed boulder, 20%, being hit by Vecna's basic attack, 10%, unhooking a survivor, 10%, completing a generator, 15%. Survivors do not gain cursed points passively while in chase. So we have a bit of a little cursed meta game going on here. The only thing this goes back to again is if these survivors are floating in the air and you have to use a Walkman to save them, you have 35 seconds to do it. I like that. I think that like there's like a teamwork aspect to it, but it has to work in a way where the survivor can do it and Vecna can't interrupt it, because if Vecna can interrupt it, then you're basically guaranteeing that someone is going to die at some point and it cannot really be stopped as long as the killer has like a 1% of a brain. It's okay that Vecna can take advantage of it, but at the same time, the survivors always need to be able to stop it without Vecna being able to interrupt it, like Pinhead's box. Like, that's not such a big deal, right? Like, if Pinhead interrupts the box, it starts the chain hunt, gives him a lot of pressure, but nobody dies. Here, it's like interrupting the box kills the survivor who's trying to solve the box instantly, you know? Like, there has to be a balance to that, and with this, like, floating thing, they don't really get into the specifics, so we can always use our imaginations. We don't have to be cynical. Maybe these Walkmans could work sort of like an EMP, so if you get within range of the survivor floating and you click the Walkman on, then they get out of it, and Vecna can still take advantage of that a little bit, right? Finally, we have running up that hill. Survivors have ways to remove cursed points. 5 grandfather clocks with a space in between, clock blocker. Survivors will see the aura when within 24 meters. Survivors can choose to kick the grandfather clock, removing 15% cursed points. After having kicked it, Vecna's tendrils will block it, clock blocking again, it for the next 30 seconds. Blocked clocks caused by other survivors will not block it for the rest of the survivors. 2 Walkmans will spawn around the map. Walkman's auras will be highlighted to survivors when within 16 meters. A survivor can listen to a Walkman for 20 seconds to remove 45 cursed points. Walkmans can only be used every 60 seconds by a survivor. They can be used twice per trial by every survivor. Walkmans count as items and can be dropped and picked up. When a survivor drops a Walkman, it disappears to a new random location. Alright, map sounds like it might be a little bit cluttered here, but overall, I think this power might sound a little complicated, but I do think it has genuine merit to it and could work. Like, legitimately, this could work. Maybe it just needs a little bit of fine tuning, and it would be a pretty cool killer to play. At least I think so. Now let's move on to the perks. Hearing things. Every 20 seconds, hearing things has a 80% chance to activate. While active, all survivors will hear your terror radius coming closer. Survivors will also hear footsteps coming closer and closer while active. This is kind of like Chucky's ability, but in perk form. And I think it's kind of cool. They obviously already have this kind of like built into the game. It might take away from Chucky a little bit, or you could run it with Chucky and be really like double deceptive. So I think this is actually a pretty interesting perk. The only problem with it is that the condition for it activating passively over and over again, and pretty often and for pretty long duration as well, is going to be a bit over the top. So that needs to be pulled back, or maybe there needs to be some kind of activation to it. Just having it passively come on over and over again, I think is a bit lame. clumsy and stupid. When survivors make mistakes, you make sure it will cost them. If a survivor misses a skill check of any kind, they will be cursed for the next 10 seconds. Their speeds of all actions will be slowed by 50%. That's a pretty cool perk. When you first read it, it kind of catches you for a second and you think that it sounds maybe too powerful, but it's really not. They have to miss a skill check, and then for only the next 10 seconds after they miss that skill check, they get punished. So you could really combo this with some things to make some pretty cool builds like Huntress Lullaby or Choleraphobia, and make like an anti-healing build where it's basically impossible to heal. So that's definitely one of those good niche perks that I like to see. And for our last perk, we have Hex Make My Own Rules. Humans are a unique type of pest. Make them go extinct. Oh, seems reasonable. When the first generator is completed, gain a token. Every time a generator is completed, gain a token. For every token, decrease survivor repair speed by 5%. Now, I'm really glad you made this a Hex perk. The only problem with it is that it's both too strong to not be a Hex perk, but it's also too pathetic to be a Hex perk in its current form. So that percentage is going to have to be bumped up a little bit, because otherwise this Hex perk is basically not going to be doing anything for you until there's like one gen left, and it's a Hex perk, so then they'll just go out and destroy it. So it needs to be a little bit more to incentivize the survivors to get off the gens and go and look for the totem, because it's just too annoying. This is almost like a more basic version of the original version of Hex Ruin. Looking back on it now, I kind of miss that old meta, so I wouldn't be so opposed to having a perk like this in the game. It just needs to be a teeny bit stronger. 5%, nah. Alright, there you have it. 4 concepts for Vecna. My personal favorite was the final one there from Several Sprays. It just feels really grounded for DBD specifically. Definitely let me know which ones you all liked the most. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of the killer being Vecna. I feel like they're only doing that because of Stranger Things, and I'd rather they just wait to have that version of Vecna in the game. Dungeons and Dragons has a lot of characters, and to be honest, Vecna isn't all that interesting in Dungeons and Dragons from what I've been able to see. I'm sure there's 100 other villains from Dungeons and Dragons that would be way more interesting than Vecna. I know it's not a Baldur's Gate 3 crossover specifically, but Orin would be my most preferred killer. I guess all that matters at the end of the day is that the killer is well designed, right? So let's just hope for that. With all that said, let me know how you feel about the upcoming chapter. And also, spoiler alert again for the next chapter, but make some Castlevania Dracula killer concepts for me to review. You can go all out and make fancy pictures, or just use the DBD Perk Maker website. I'll put a link to it below. Email it to me, send it to me on Twitter, or just throw it on Reddit and I'll probably find it. Also, don't forget to leave a like only if you enjoyed the video, and as always, thanks for watching and have a good one.